I have a sponsor, and I've sponsored a few women. And yeah, like you said, I'm here from LICYPAA, Long Island Committee of Young People in AA. You'll see plenty of us because we got, I think, a 5 Wednesday month, so it's gonna be awesome. So to start off, like I always say, like despite what I would have said as a teenager, I had a pretty like normal, nice childhood. Um, like I don't, there's nothing in my like childhood story that's like, oh, that's why you're an alcoholic. Like that's why you're an addict. Um, which I know like a lot of non-alcoholics like think that like that's why we are the way we are. Like, oh, something happened to you. So I was like starting off with that. But if you asked me when I was like a teenager, I'd be like, oh yeah, like it's definitely like family trauma and stuff. It's like, listen, I don't think any of us have ever had a perfect family life. Um, and like, so certainly I didn't have a perfect family. I don't think that exists, but I don't think anything that happened to me growing up is why I'm an alcoholic. So my journey with alcohol actually started later than most people, because I was just very quiet and sheltered. When I was younger, we moved around a lot, so I kind of like kept to myself. So I didn't really start drinking outside of like Thanksgiving, until I was 18. And it was like one time I drank with friends outside of school towards the end of my senior year, and it was nothing spectacular. But then I went to school in Montreal. Suddenly I went from not being able to buy alcohol to being surrounded by people that have been drinking for a while and being completely legal to drink because the drinking age is 18. And I was off to the races. Like first night there, played drinking games for the first time, and that was the first time I got sick from drinking. And this was the first time I had to hide, like, oh, that I had thrown up for my parents because they came to sit by to me in my dorm room. And I was like, yeah, don't look too closely because it was definitely not like dirty clothes hidden under the bed right now. And that did not dissuade me at all from drinking. And I suddenly got introduced to club life, fell in love with that, and dedicated most nights every week of clubbing until the sun came up. Of course, I was there for college, like to, go to school. I thought I was going to get my PhD, and being an academic, I was like a gifted kid. And by the end of that semester, they were like, "Hey, like you're very much failing." And I was like, "How?" Like they're like, "Well, because you don't go to class, so it's kind of not a surprise." And I was like, "Okay, I'll fix that. I'll fix that." And I'd already gotten to the point that the other college kids in my dorm didn't want to go out drinking with me, which I feel like says a lot because like if you've been to college or around college kids, like none of them really drink healthily. And I was already at that point within like a couple months where people were like, no, like you can kind of do your own thing. I think we're to go drink on our own. Like my first blackout was like a month into college. And then that was like a 3 or 4 night a week thing. um I think I'm missing like at least a month of memory from just that 1 year I did there because that second semester I did even worse. I think I had like a point 0.3 GPA or something. Like I didn't know that was possible. And so they said like, okay, you can't stay at this school. And then the Canadian government was like, so if you want to like get into another school somehow with a point 0.3 GPA, you could stay in the country, but like obviously if you're not in school, your visa is not valid. So I had to move back to Long Island, and that came after a spectacular bender where I convinced myself that like I could still live there with my friends. And I got out there before everybody to like get the apartment set. Like I hadn't told any of them I got kicked out yet. I didn't told my parents I got kicked out yet. So I was convinced I would find some way to do this. Did I have any plan? Not at all. And I was alone, so I went on a week long bender. And I called my parents and I was like, all right, so I'm about to info dump a bunch on you. And then after I do that, you guys have to come drive 10 hours north, come get me. And like, this is not a debate. Like, this is what y'all do it. And they did it. Like I said, teenage me would have been like, oh yeah, my parents horrible. But like, I told them like, hey, I'm going through something and I need to come home. And they were up there like, I think it was closer to like 9 hours because how my dad drives. So I had to come back here, and like it was kind of like known then that like I had some sort of substance problem, but it wasn't like super specific, but it was kind of just like, okay, like it was the environment, you're on your own in college in a city. So I came back, I got my first job. I had like soft plans maybe to go back to school. But within a few months, because I started working my first job, and that meant I had money to go like buy beer and stuff because I had some older friends. And So my drinking didn't really change. It was mostly like my dry good use went down. But my drinking did not change really when I came back from college. And I spent those few months just, instead of drinking at clubs, it was alone in my room. And within, I think it was like not even 6 months of coming back to the States, I was in my first psych ward. And this was back at the very beginning of 2017. So I just come out as trans the months before that. I came out as trans like a month before the 2016 election. So like it was not a great time. And so like I had many reasons to tell myself like it's okay that I drink this much because like things don't look great for me right now. So I ended up my first psych ward. And that was like the first time that I realized like, oh shit, like parents gotta have my back because they like really like fought for me in there, like because I was a mess and I did not have a good experience in psych ward. And I managed to get out of there. It was I think 2 weeks instead of it was like, oh, it's a 3 week hold. No, it became a 2 week situation. And I finally come home and it was like I didn't want to get sober, but I had medical professionals, my family, like literally anybody that knew me being like, hey, you should probably like stop drinking and doing drugs. So I did do that. I stopped for a while. And the way I described I was able to stop for a while, I didn't start going to 12-step programs. I just like shut myself away from the world because there wasn't anything like to bother me, really, you know? Um, so I managed to do that. I had tried another 12-step program for a little while. I went to NA and I was like, because I didn't have a drinking problem. My first therapist was like, hey, you need to try something. I was like, well, I don't have a drinking problem. That was never the problem. So I'm going to go to NA. And then they're like, well, we include the alcohol. Like, you can't drink. Like, that's also a problem for you. And I was like, that sounds fake. And then I was like, you know what? I have a drinking problem. I don't have a drug problem. Like, I don't belong here. And did I go to AA? Absolutely, I did not. Um, so I kept just like white knuckling it for a while. Um, and I was really like, yeah, like I'm an alcoholic and I don't drink, but it's like whatever. Like I don't need a program, whatever. And then like right around before the pandemic hit, my timing was beautiful. I decided like, you know what? It's been long enough. I was like, because I was like 19 when I first stopped drinking. So I was like, you know what? I've grown up. I'm 21 now, so maybe there's a reason for the law. And so I was like, you know what? It's time to start drinking again. And that first night, I told myself, this is the test. You know I was a blackout drinker. I was like, I'm going to drink like X amount of what I bought. And if it goes well, like, this is a new thing. I ended up drinking everything I had and blacking out a little bit, which should have been the immediate side, like, oh, you are alcoholic. This was a mistake. But instead, I was like, you know what? It wasn't that bad. I didn't like lose all my money. I didn't almost get arrested. I didn't almost get deported or something. Because there's some times when I was living in Montreal, I was like, damn, like, I'm surprised like they let me stay in the country after that. So I decided like, you know what? Drinking's totally fine. And with it, after a couple of months, the pandemic happened, which was honestly perfect for me as an alcoholic at that point because the job I had was still going. So I was actually making more money. And being home alone in my room was preferred by the world. Like shut yourself up in your room. Perfect. It's a pandemic. So I was able to just drink as much as I wanted in secret. And I thought I had like a good balance of it. I thought it was normal because a lot of people were kind of doing that. I feel like even non-alcoholics. And after a few months of doing that, um, I made like a very conscious attempt on my life. And I had made I mentioned it mostly because I had this idea of a coin flip of, if this works, then obviously no more. But if it doesn't, then that means I need to get help. And I know I can't ask for that help. Like I knew myself at that point. I'd been in therapy a little bit. I'd been through the rigmarole that had led me to another psych ward before. And like I knew I wasn't capable of asking for that help at that point in my life. But I knew that I would end up in another psych ward and be offered help. And that's exactly what happened. Like this, I had like my first step experience in that hospital when I woke up. And I feel like objectively that hospital experience was worse than my first one. But because I actually like knew I belonged there and I knew I needed help, I had a much better like experience. And in that psych ward, I met the man who ended up introducing me to AA. He was like walking around with a big book, and I like mentioned like having a drinking problem with like some people in there, and they someone's like, yeah, there's this guy in another building walking around with like a big book. He's trying to get people to like do meetings with him or something. And I was like, wow, that's weird. And we end up in the same ward for discharge. And we meet and me, him, and this one guy end up having like that was kind of my first meeting. It was three alcoholics reading the big book together. And so we got released on the same day. He said, 5 a.m. tomorrow, I'm picking you up. I said, 5 a.m. He goes, yeah, you're going to your first meeting. And it's a 6 a.m. meeting we have in Long Island. And I walk in there with him. It's all these older people talking about their divorces and their kids. And I was like, immediately just on set, I was like, I don't look like these people. Like I'm queer, young, trans, like I feel like I don't belong here. But at that point, I knew what would happen if I didn't stay sober because I had seen it twice already. Like I had seen what happens when I decided that I'm okay on my own. So I stayed. And I stayed in that group for a little while, listening and like trying to learn how to relate to the when they would talk about drinking, because like their drinking didn't look like my drinking. I always thought I'm like, well, I was like a club kid, and like they were drinking at like the bar with their buddies. Like I felt like it was so different, and it took a while to actually like listen to the feelings involved. But through that meeting, we also had like a midday meeting, and the chair of one of those meetings had founded a young person's group in that area. And when I met him, he brought me to what would become my first like true home group, which is Young at Heart's young person's meeting here in Long Island. He ended up becoming my first sponsor and introduced me to like LICYPAA. And I started going to conferences. I started getting commitments. That's when on Long Island we had just started. My first conference was I got to watch people that now are like my family. I watched them win the bid, and I had no idea what was happening, but I saw these people like hugging each other and crying. I was like, something crazy is happening, but I don't understand it. And so my first LICYPAA meeting was the meeting where they were setting the date for our elections to find out like who was going to be hosting. And I had no idea what was going on with any of this. Like that first conference, I was like so nervous, and I was like, this is so weird. I'm not gonna lie and say I had a blast because it was just so. I was like, I think 60 days max. But I ended up getting a new sponsor not long after that, who was also in LICYPAA, and he took me to so many conferences throughout that year and the next one. And I say now, like I did my like year or two where like I went to like every single conference I could afford or like not afford really. Um, Especially like when you're new and you just kind of get dragged. They're like, well, are you working? No. Well, you don't have an excuse then. Like it's not like you have to call out of work. You're not even working. So I just get dragged into these things. So I ended up doing that for a couple of years, and I learned so much about service, which people always say like service keeps you sober, and I agree with saying that, but for me, I've taken that a little too far at times. There have been times in my sobriety where the only meetings I'm making are service committee meetings. And like I've always been aware like that's not the same as having a home group or going to an actual meeting like this. But I'm like I'm interacting with other alcoholics. I'm doing service. This is enough. And those have been like those like plateaus or even like those darker like dry drunk times of my sobriety. Um, because like I want to say like 6 to 8 months ago, I can't do my math right now. Like a relationship that I got into maybe a little too early. It was not before my first year ended, but I just finished the steps. So it was in my head, it was fine. Ended. It was right after we had a big event, LICYPAA. I got dumped, and that was like one of the biggest like life changes, like negative life changes in sobriety for me. And I was very much in that like, oh, the only meetings I'm going to are the LICYPAA meetings. And I've recently like got a new sponsor who's actually on my committee and started going like I got a new actual home group instead of treating my committee like a home group. And it hit me how much I was missing out on when I was hanging out with my people at LICYPAA for the first time in a while, because I would go to the meetings, but I wouldn't like go out with them like to in-person meetings and like go to food afterwards. And I mentioned like that breakup, it was like such a emotional hardship for me and such like a test of my growth and sobriety. Um, and do you want to restate at the end? Oh, I just that was a private message. I'll restate it at the end. Um, but like that was just like a big event in my sober life, and no one on my committee who was like, "That's my AA family," knew about it. Like I casually meant like, "Oh, yada yada." My ex, they're like, "You guys broke up? Like you must have been devastated," because they knew how codependent I was. And so I went through that without my AA family, and I to this day I'm not sure like how I managed to do that without reaching out to people. Um, I sometimes just chalk it up to like having gone through the steps and those periods of time where I like very intently was doing step work and going to meetings and talking to people. Because like I definitely was not at my best and my life was not at its best. But like the very basic things of like I didn't drink today, I was able to hold on to that. Um, just by like being around AA and knowing like, oh my God, like this is the one thing I need to do, even though my life is falling down around me and like I know there's a better way. Um, it was very tough to kind of like fall away from AA, and I have to come back and be like, hey, sorry, like you guys missed so much of my life. Um, I also want to mention that another reason that I say when I introduce myself, I say I'm grateful to be an alcoholic, is because I know that a lot of the problems I have, like maybe being codependent, different mental illness stuff, I would probably still have those problems regardless whether or not I'm an alcoholic. But because I'm an alcoholic, um, and have come to AA and gotten to learn all these skills and go through the steps and that psychic change that we get through going through the steps, I have learned things like, oh, like I always thought I was the biggest victim in everything, especially my relationship with my parents. And now like I'm able to see like, oh my God, like not only did I have a part in that, but like my parents are like not bad people. Like actually I'm starting to have a much better relationship with them throughout, like even like throughout the years of my sobriety, like even very recently. um and that I chalk up completely to the work I've done in this program and the examples that have been set for me by people in this program. Like I feel like if I wasn't an alcoholic, I never would have gotten to like this level of understanding like my part in things and be able to clear that wreckage away to have a relationship with these people again. So it's definitely been like a rockier road in my sobriety, but something that like when you come start to see like the changes and you all one day you're like, oh my God, wait, like I would have been so like resentful no matter what this person was doing, no matter what they did for me, I still would have been like, oh, but I'm going to hold that one thing you did when I was 12 against you. Instead of being like, well, I made worse mistakes than that. I treated you worse than that. Why am I holding this against you when you clearly don't hold that against me? Um, just that realization that like earthlings don't hold resentments from like 20 years ago quite the same way that we do, or like are want to do at least. So that's just one of the like beautiful things I found in my sobriety. Um, and I think I'll restate the intro now because I feel like we're at like a good end it point. So again, hi, I'm Ellie. I'm grateful alcoholic. My sobriety date is August 8th of 2021. I have a sponsor. I've sponsored other women. I've been through all 12 steps and some traditions, and I'm a member of LICYPAA.